Hello everybody, today I will read an article that I wrote about Italy and its fascist past. Let's go. When we talk about the past and history, we should always make a distinction between what happened and what is remembered. Each people re-elaborates its past through an operation of cultural politics. Some events are exalted, others are sweetened, others are misrepresented, others completely removed. Now, these constructions of the past to be remembered is very complex and stratified over time, for the simple fact that many actors take part in it: historians, politicians, professors, associations, ministers of education, publishers of school books, but also artists as writers and directors. And whenever a given historical event is exalted or removed, there is always an ideological reason, even when not openly declared. We humans work like this. Everything we do it because we see a reason to do it. We load it with meaning and symbolic value. We find sense of what we do even when we are obliged, let alone when we act without too many external conditionings. And the construction of the past to be remembered is no exception. It normally rises for the sake of a cause or purpose, two things that sometimes coincide. But the point is that every historical operation, even when born for a good reason, has, so to speak, a life of its own, and often ends up having consequences that perhaps were not in the intentions of those who carried out that historic operation. In this speech, I would like to concentrate on a historical operation that has created more damages than benefits to the consciousness of the Italian people, and which has had very bad consequences on the political life of the last 70 years. The operation of construction of the past to which I refer is the almost total removal of the responsibilities of fascist Italy before and during the Second World War. In order to simplify at the maximum, the Italian collective consciousness of that period is that Nazi Germany, led by Adolf Hitler, is the only and real responsible for the death and destruction throughout Europe during the Second World War, and that Italy found itself in the uncomfortable position of having to go to war alongside the Germans because of the Pact of Steel signed in May 1939 by Mussolini, who, after all, did not want this war. In short, the real villains of the Second World War were the Nazis. Fascist Italy did not have any real responsibility. Indeed, the Italians often behaved well and had a bad end, as in Kefalonia, where after the armistice they were mass murdered by the Germans. But it's not so. History is clear. Italy has taken a strongly aggressive and bloody policy before and during the Second World War. The episodes are many and striking. The most serious one is probably the most neglected in the collective imaginary, namely the war in Ethiopia of the years 1935-1936, followed by the expulsion of the Italians by the British in 1941, after the fighting resumed in June 1940. It is estimated that over 200,000 Ethiopian soldiers were killed for the conquest campaign. Among the generals to distinguish himself for particularly fierce methods, such as the use of gas, it was a certain Pietro Badoglio, who signed the armistice on September the 8th, 1943. The same Pietro Badoglio was described by the UN among the war criminals, but he was never tried. On the whole, considering the period of occupation from 1935 to 1941, Italy attributed over 700,000 Ethiopian victims among the military and the civilians. And despite this, as far as I know, there is no trace of an Italian delegation going to Ethiopia to apologize for the massacres caused under the fascist regime. Nothing at all. The most opportune occasion would be maybe the 5th, an Ethiopian national holiday which recalls the return of the Ethiopian king Haile Selassie and the recovered independence of 1941. Another ignominious episode of the ignominious fascist history, the support of the regime to the reactionary Francoist revolution against the legitimate Spanish Republican government in 1936. Data on the victims and the damages that the fascist Corpo Truppe Volontarie caused are very difficult to find, and yet, to understand the gravity of these facts, the policy that underlies them is already enough to ingest militarily in the affairs of a foreign country to overthrow the legitimate government. But of these there is nothing left in the memory of the Italian people. It is at most a paragraph of the history book of high school. It seems that the Spaniards themselves were experiencing even today an ugly complex regards to the Francoist past, neglected the fascist atrocities, probably because they were exceeded abundantly by the Nazi ones. There is not a corresponding Guernica of Pablo Picasso to remember the infamy that we Italians carry with us in this war. To follow a chronological order, now it would be the turn of the Italian aggressions to France and to Egypt in 1940, but in this case we limit ourselves to mentioning the fact without dwelling any longer. A special mention is needed for Greece. Mussolini promised to break the kidneys to Greece. Why? There was no real reason. Greece was governed by the dictator Metaxas, who was even a friend of Benito Mussolini. But this was not enough to advise more prudence and dignity to the stiff and sullen Italian criminal. Greece was weak in the eyes of the fascist leadership, an easy prey in order to add a piece to the megalomaniac plan of conquering the entire Mediterranean coast and realize the so-called Mare Nostrum. And so Italy, after invading the satellite state of Albania in 1939, launched a massive attack on Greece on October 28, 1940, concentrating its forces on the border with Albania, that is, on Epirus. Now, for the strange cases of life, here history is indirectly intertwined with my story. My partner is Greek. Her father is from Kefalonia, her mother is from Epirus. Her maternal grandfather, Yannis Bothetius, fought that war of resistance against the Italian invader. In fact, Greece had turned the big no to fascist Italy. The resistance was strenuous, but did not prevent the Italian from killing civilians, burning entire villages and committing rapes. These are stories told and handed down among the people of Epirus. It is more difficult to find them in the history books. Yannis Bothetius survived, and after the war he started a family. At the time he was about 30 years old and was a teacher at elementary and middle schools. Even in this case, Italy has never apologized nor sent a delegation to commemorate the victims of that useless war. The perfect day is already there. As in the Ethiopian case, the Greek people also established a significant day of World War II as a national holiday. It is precisely on October the 28th, the day when Greece made the Dantesque great refusal, the great no to Megalo Ochi. And what Italians do instead? We have depicted our soldiers as friendly vacationers who went to Greece to bring sympathy, love and humanity. A clear example is the movie Mediterraneo by Gabriele Salvatore, a film which tells of an hypothetical Italian contingent forced to remain on an unspecified island of the Aegean, where they end up in solidarity with the local population. This film is an historical operation which is incorrect, profoundly incorrect, I would say. And at the same time, it is a film that I fell in love with as a child, a film I have seen dozens of times and that has probably instilled in me my first love for Greece. But Greece was also Kefalonia, as we said, and even here my story indirectly intersects with history. That splendid island of the Ionian was occupied by the Italians by the Acqui Brigade, until after the armistice the Germans did definitely take the upper hand and condemned it to a violent death the Italian soldier who did not want to obey the orders of the new enemies. The screenplay Cefalonia of 2005 with Nicola Zingaretti, an Italian actor, describes only those last and dramatic developments. But the Italian occupants were not as kind and harmless as we are willing to believe. They were not the same ones who had attacked Epirus, but still enemies. In fact, the Italians used to raid the food of the houses of the locals. By force of threats and beating, they have taken away oil, cheese, and animals. The paternal grandmother of my partner, Antonia Ruchota, a lady I had the good fortune to meet, was a teenager at the time. She remembered well the way, not very nice indeed, whereby the Italians treated the locals. She remembered the injustice and abuses, remembered that the soldiers of the Kingdom of Italy had taken the strange habit of eating even donkeys. Even a lot of time after, she still asked the Italian tourists whether we Italians were keeping to have the passion for donkey meat. Mrs. Antonia also remembered that the Italians loved to sing and celebrate. Yes, that's true. But she had no memory of either mandolins nor Capitan Scorelli, who made refined coats for local girls. Quite the contrary. But let's move on in this pitiless review. Croatia. In Italy, with a law of 2004, every February the 10th, the victims of the Foibe are commemorated. That is, the Italians killed by the Yugoslav partisans at the end of the World War. The massacre was particularly cruel and indiscriminate. Remembering those deaths is a tribute to the inane sacrifice of many unarmed Italians. Yet, we have removed that those brutal actions of the partisans led by Titus were committed as a retaliation to the fascist aggression on the Kingdom of Croatia in 1941. We have forgotten that we have occupied today's Slovenia and part of Croatia after the Germans decided to intervene in the Balkan Peninsula to remedy the disasters and the shaky results of the Italians. The occupation of those territories was marked by an endless series of clashes with the Yugoslav resistance, which over time grew stronger and stronger, so much so that both the Italians and the Germans were eventually defeated. In the meantime, however, there were both a violent repression of opponents and the acquisition of the Italian language, as it had already happened in Südtirol or in Trieste in the years following the First World War. That said, no one can justify the brutality of Yugoslav reprisal against the Italian civilians commemorated on February the 10th. I firmly believe that every action is first of all the fruit of a choice. Even when the choice seems obligatory or the control of one's own drives seems impossible, there is always a margin of choice. Given a context and a past, every reaction is still a deliberate act. But on the other hand, we can say that if there was need for reasons or pretext to act with cruelty against the Italians of Istria and Dalmatia, the fascists had abundantly provided them. We conclude this historical review, which is approximate but I hope effective. We also neglect the campaign of reconquest of Libya by fascism during the 1920s and beyond, and together with this, we also neglect the ignoble censorship of the film The Lion of the Desert in 1981, which highlighted the terrible repression of the Libyan resistance headed by the over 70-year-old teacher Omar al-Mukhtar, who was arrested and executed in 1931. At this point, the two questions are, first, why did the Italian people decide to completely remove this past? Second, what have been the most harmful consequences of this operation? To the former, I will answer with an hypothesis in good faith. At the end of the war, in consideration of the clash between partisans and fascists, but also of the substantial support to Benito Mussolini, which lasted 20 years, some thought that the best way to return to a peaceful coexistence between Italians was to leave the past behind and to pretend that nothing happened. Emblematic is the song Siamo in Napoli, paesa, we are from Naples, fellow citizen, which the refrain that everyone knows in Italy. Who received, received, received. Who gave, who gave, who gave. Let's forget the past. We are both from Naples, fellow citizen. And to the latter question, I will answer this way instead. If at the beginning the removal may have helped the process of reconstruction of the country, even if I have many doubts about this, The fact that neither afterwards there were any real consideration of a so inconvenient past was deleterious, both for the collective attitude of Italians and for our political and party tradition. Having denied the heavy Italian involvement in one of the worst wars of history has made us lose the opportunity as a people to ripe, to take responsibility for the historical errors and moral debt that we have contracted with many of our neighbors in the Mediterranean and in Africa. And this implicitly self-absolving attitude has had consequences in the political field too, as I said. In fact, the myth of fascism has never been demolished in its entirety, and it still lives like a past that, yes, has had its faults but also its merits. And this is at the basis of the historical absence in Italy of a conservative right that is openly anti-fascist. All the parties that claim a conservative right-wing position in Italy do not manage to condemn the fascist regime without reserve, and this is a big problem. It's an anomaly of our democracy, a stain sometimes little recognizable, but that leaves the door open to a dangerous historical revisionism, which in turn can constitute the cultural basis for an authoritarian right drift. We should rather take example from Germany. So many things can be blamed on the Germans, but there is no doubt that the German people have done much better than us with history. The neo-Nazi groups are still there, it is true, but the German conservative right is beyond any reasonable doubt anti-Nazi. The CDU is a conservative party that has fully embraced democratic values. Not even the recent right-wing party Alternative für Deutschland, some whose members have in some cases expressed a vaguely revisionist position, has reached the heights of our right-wing parties of the past and present. To conclude, my hope is that Italy will succeed, even if after a long time, to do a serious work of reflection on its past. It would be perhaps painful, but we could only benefit from it. It is very difficult for a country to move with steady steps in the contemporaneity if it has not previously made peace with its past. So, thank you for watching. This is enough. See you next time.